Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is April 24th. It is approximately 7:30 in the evening, and I wanted to talk to you about what's happening to American citizens, something that we have been seeing over and over again. This is a pattern that we have seen from 2021, 2022, and now in 2023. Literally, it looks like it's on a to-do list checked off once a year. It's important. It is affecting you, your families, your friends, Americans across this nation, and it's having an impact internationally as well. What are we talking about? We're going to go over that and the latest poll and the results that it shows. But before we get started with that, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you're seeing our channel, we want to welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear your voice, to hear what you have to say about all the different issues that affect you and all of us across the globe. Because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to ask questions and to talk about the issues that affect you. Even if your government doesn't agree, even if the internet overlords don't like it, we want to hear your voice every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we hope to see you this Sunday as well. With that said, let's talk about what's happening today. It's a big deal. Obviously, you may have heard about this. We were talking about this just yesterday. As a matter of fact, we were talking about it on our Sunday live stream, which you can see now, and we were talking about how the Biden administration took all of the American diplomats and evacuated them from the Sudan. Why did they do that? Well, the Sudan is going insane. We are seeing that nation break down. There is a civil war, well, essentially a civil war that's going on. The various factions that have been fighting for literally 2 decades in the Sudan, some of them involved in the genocide that has happened in the Sudan, they're continuing to fight. And some of this is having an impact because of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and outside forces trying to influence the direction in Africa, something that we have seen since the Afghanistan withdrawal, the rout of the Biden administration, when we turned over the keys to the prisons that held over 5,000 members of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are resurging. And again, we are seeing this in Africa more than most anywhere else in the world. And the United States is not the only country that is evacuating. We know that Britain and France and many other countries are evacuating, and they did so on Sunday. While it is new that the U.S. Embassy in the Sudan is being emptied, and that 70 diplomats left with about 100 American U.S. forces taking them out of the country, American citizens were left behind. Thousands of American citizens were left behind, and we will go over that as we relate this to you. But it's not the first time. This is the third strike. This is the pattern that we have seen, and we have been seeing this year after year after year. And the mainstream media does not want to tell you that the Biden-Harris administration has absolutely no problem leaving Americans behind. That Mark Milley, the Joint Chiefs under the Biden-Harris administration, are only concerned about high-level diplomats, members of the United States government, and the political fallout from their actions and their policies that are affecting the entire world. Now, that's a very big claim to make, to say that the Biden administration doesn't care about you, the individual American. They don't care about you overseas, and it would make us wonder if they actually care about you here in the United States domestically. And it has massive implications because if the world is watching this and Joe Biden is factually, empirically abandoning American citizens, abandoning his own people to save face for the sake of the next election, then how can any of our allies trust Joe Biden when he promises to take care of them, to fight against communism in China, to fight against North Korea and their missiles, ICBMs, to fight against Russia and support the Ukraine. How can any of our allies trust that Joe Biden will actually stand by them if he won't stand by his own people? This is a question and an issue we have been talking about since 2021. One of the few news media sources that has been following these stories and consistently talking about it. We started talking about this in 2021. And in fact, at the end of the year, in December of 2021, we stated that the biggest lie that has been told to the American people, far bigger than you can keep your doctor, far bigger than perhaps even Watergate, was in fact the lie that Joe Biden is bringing everyone home, that he saved American lives, that he brought everyone back from Afghanistan. That was just a flat-out lie, as we detailed and showed you how month by month by month, from August all the way through all of 2021, the Biden administration kept changing the numbers. How many Americans were left in Afghanistan? We were initially told it was 85. Then we were told 100. Then we were told 200. The numbers kept changing. The number of Americans that were returned home kept changing. And throughout the entire process, Joe Biden spoke less and less about Afghanistan. And to this day, there is virtually zero coverage of Americans in Afghanistan or the country of Afghanistan at all. The American news media does not want to talk about this. And like we said then, when we highlighted this, and we will play this for you for a moment, you see, we did learn that, as reported by the Business Insider, on September 27th, there are 100 Americans still trying to get out of Afghanistan. That's interesting, because we had been told that there were only maybe 100 Americans still in Afghanistan. And yet, even after getting out 85 Americans between September 1st and September 27th, another 100 Americans remained in Afghanistan. It doesn't make sense. This is one of the reasons why it's such a big lie. Because the Biden-Harris administration, as we can show you here, the numbers kept changing. And it got harder and harder to find out what the actual numbers were. In fact, PolitiFact addressed this on December 7th of 2021, saying that it's mostly false to say that 10,000 to 15,000 Americans were abandoned in Afghanistan by the Biden-Harris administration. They were covering up the story intentionally and deceptively, we believe. You see, if you go through their review and the fact that they do admit the Biden administration lied to the American people, there were more Americans in Afghanistan than we were promised, and we returned more Americans back home than the numbers of Americans they kept saying were in Afghanistan in the first place. We see that PolitiFact is saying, well, no, they weren't abandoned. They wanted to stay. This is a statement you're going to hear a lot. The answer from the Biden-Harris administration to absolve them of any guilt or any problem is, well, they just want to stay. Let's address that very quickly. Who wants to stay in a war zone? Can you imagine any American citizen has the choice to come back to America, a nation that is mostly peaceful, that is relatively calm? There are no civil wars happening in the United States, even though there are autonomous zones throughout the United States, and those autonomous zones are responsible for billions of dollars of damage in burning our cities from time to time. Even though there is rioting and there are attacks by Antifa against the public, we are still looking at overwhelmingly 90% of Americans live their lives without any real concern, without any real danger. This isn't France where terrorist bombs are going off on a regular basis. This isn't anywhere in the Middle East where not only terrorist bombs, but cars and actual civil wars are ongoing on a regular basis, or in Africa or in Southeast Asia where we see that tensions are rising. America is calm. And you have a choice to be in America with the highest quality of life, with the most freedom in the world, with some of the best income in the world, no matter what job you're doing. The poor in America are in the top 80 percentile of richest people in the world. The poor. Or you could live in a war zone. Not as a soldier, not as a mercenary, just a regular citizen, somebody who's going to do paperwork, a secretary, someone who's working on inputting data on a computer. They would do that in a war zone, or they could do that in America, and they would never be endangered with their family, their children, their wives. Does that make any sense to you? Who would make that choice? We reject this claim by the Biden-Harris administration that American citizens en masse, in the thousands upon thousands, are choosing to live in a war zone rather than to come home and live in peace. We reject that. It doesn't make sense. It's just not logical. But coming back to Politico in December of 2021, they mentioned that the number, that 9,000 Americans remaining in Afghanistan, is correct, but the excuse is what the Biden administration said. But the Biden administration said they don't want to leave. Who asked them? How do we know that they don't want to come home? There isn't anyone, there are no Americans, no American government in Afghanistan. We don't have an embassy. We don't have a State Department there. We don't know what's happening in Afghanistan day to day. When we hear from the Biden-Harris administration, well, they wanted to stay. How do you know that? We can confirm that at least some of them have been captured by the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, by terrorist forces, and are being held against their will. We can confirm that in 2023. But in 2021, we were told, no, they just want to stay. But PolitiFact said, nope, this is mostly false. You have to believe the Biden-Harris administration because these Americans chose to stay and live in a war zone where they are being targeted by the Taliban, by Al-Qaeda, and by ISIS. 3 different terrorist organizations are hunting Americans to kill them. Somehow we don't think that's true. And now we see that on February 3rd of 2022, from the United States Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, we had proof that 9,000 Americans, as was initially reported and spoken about by Politico, it is correct. 9,000 Americans were left in Afghanistan, and the Biden-Harris administration knew it. And rather than tell the American people, rather than be honest, they lied. We know it was closer to 9,000, and then very, very quietly, coming out from the Washington Times, this is a story that no one seemed to be able to cover. We find out that 175 Americans are still in Afghanistan in 2023. This article came out on March 23rd of 2023. There are 175 Americans recognized by the State Department and Secretary Blinken, the Biden-Harris administration, that are in Afghanistan, and some of these individuals are being held as prisoners of the Taliban, of terrorists who want to kill them and ransom them and gain international attention. In fact, we know today that somewhere closer to 1,000 Americans have returned to the United States after being abandoned in 2021 by the Biden-Harris administration. That's the compassion of the Biden-Harris administration. That's how much they are concerned and they care. The weakness that was on display led to Vladimir Putin entering into the Ukraine and starting that war. It was after that rout, that embarrassment, that China decided Joe Biden was weak and started threatening to invade Taiwan. It was after that moment that the rest of the world started to militarize and begin to build up their armies. And that was only bolstered after we saw what happened next, because it was in 2022. In fact, it was February of 2022 that we saw that the next shoe dropped. Almost like the to-do list the next year, checking off that box, Joe Biden told the world that he was going to leave American citizens in danger. When NBC, Joe Biden told NBC that he will allow American children to die in the White House. And now we hear from Lester Holt that Joe Biden himself is willing to violate Executive Order 12656. That Joe Biden himself will not protect American citizens when they are in harm. He will not safeguard them. The very purpose why our government exists. In February of 2022, Joe Biden went on to NBC News in an exclusive interview with Lester Holt and told the American people that he would violate an executive order, that he would violate the actual purpose of all governments in the world, no matter what type of government it may be, and abandon American citizens and allow them to be in harm's way instead of evacuating them, or at the very least evacuating the children when he knew a war was imminent. Biden got the State Department out. He took out all of the United States embassy workers. He got the government officials out and left the people behind, which means that the people who were left behind no longer have an embassy as a safe haven. They no longer have an embassy or a State Department that can work with them directly to get them out of the country and into safety. In fact, it was 20 to 30,000 Americans that were in harm's way. This is an article that came from NPR, and this was on February 18th of 2022, that again, the Biden-Harris administration and the major news media tried to push this lie again. But rather than raise their children in peace, they decided to raise their children in an active war zone with bombs that are dropping on schools. Does that make sense? Does that sound like any parent you have ever heard of? Because that's what NPR was trying to tell you in 2022. So that again, that brings us to where we are now in 2023. For the third time, we are now seeing that once again, the American government is leaving Americans in danger, in harm's way. Elected officials, individuals working for the government, no, they've been sent home. We talked about this not only in a short, but as we had mentioned before, we covered this on the live stream that we did. If you're looking at the mainstream media, what you're seeing is dozens of Americans have expressed an interest in leaving the Sudan. This is an affiliate of CNN on today, April 24th, and they announced that we're seeing the Biden-Harris administration try to tell you that thousands of Americans, in this case, 16,000 Americans, are deciding that they would rather live and raise their children in an active war zone, in a country that is best known, the Sudan is best known for a 2-decade-long genocide of people having the wrong religion. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. But they are saying, and I quote, We do, of course, know the number of Americans who have registered with us and with whom we're in very active touch, communication, of course. Of those, I would say some dozens expressed an interest in leaving. So how many Americans did the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, the State Department, how many Americans are they speaking to? They're playing with the numbers. They want to minimize this. They want you to think that this is not a big deal, that American citizens are being helped and Joe Biden and the Biden administration are compassionate and care. Except they won't give you the numbers so you can see what the reality is. They don't want you to see that this is connected to what they have consistently been doing year after year after year. Literally 3 years in a row now. No, they don't want you to realize that. But if you go to yet another article coming from the United States Department of Defense, the United States Department of Defense, again, these are all credible sources. The links will be in the description. U.S. troops stand ready to help diplomats as the Sudan conflict continues. So the United States military is saying they will help save American citizens, that they are willing to save American citizens, just like they tried to do in Afghanistan, just like they tried to do in the Ukraine, and just as we are seeing right now, and the Biden-Harris administration is holding them back. It is the Biden-Harris administration, the commander-in-chief, who is denying the American military the opportunity to save 16,000 American lives. Quote, in terms of next steps, U.S. Africa Command and the Department of Defense continue to work closely with the State Department, which has the lead for helping American citizens wishing to depart the Sudan. Those efforts include providing intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities to observe potential land routes out of Sudan, to detect threats, and positioning naval assets off the coast of Sudan should they be needed, which is all wonderful, except how is a civilian ever going to know that? Civilians don't have access to the military or military communications. Civilians don't have access to the United States Department of State, nor do they have access to the White House. And since all of the diplomats left, they're on their own. There is no resource that can help them, just like in Afghanistan, just like in the Ukraine. Once again, it is the Biden administration that is holding them back. The United States Department of Defense has said they want to help American citizens. And it is the Biden-Harris administration is denying these troops the ability to do their job, to save American lives. I want to emphasize that because the mainstream media isn't. As you can see with NPR, as you can see with PolitiFact, they are trying to minimize this. They are trying to let you forget about this. They're trying to isolate what happened in the Sudan so you don't notice the trend that has happened each and every year under the Biden-Harris administration. Which is why we talk about it and have been talking about it every single Sunday live stream that we have been doing since 2021. And why we will continue to speak about this even as our channel is suppressed, because we are trying to tell you the truth and give you the information you need to ask your elected officials and to hold them accountable. And it is working. There was a Yougov poll today, April 24th, that came out earlier in the day. We took the poll. This is in reference to the violence in the Sudan and the fact that the Biden-Harris administration abandoned American citizens. The first question from the Yougov poll that we took earlier today asked, well, how many people are actually paying attention to the story? Approximately 51% of the people who took the poll when we did were following this issue. The question that was asked is it right or wrong for the government to evacuate diplomats and their families before American civilians? This is the key word. Not just American citizens in Sudan, but American civilians, just like your neighbors down the street. Is it right or is it wrong that Joe Biden focused on getting the embassy crew out and left the civilians to fend for themselves? At the time that we took the poll, only 34% of those taking this poll think it was wrong, that they thought it was the right thing to take diplomats and leave civilians in a war zone, to take away their choice, their freedom, and to abandon the exact purpose of government, which is to protect the people. We are shocked by this result. There is an estimated 16,000 civilian Americans in the Sudan. When it comes to those American citizens, how much confidence do you have that the United States government to support and evacuate them? 54% of the people who took this have no confidence in Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They have no confidence in Mark Milley. They do not believe that the United States government will come to help those civilians. And I ask you, if they won't go to save anyone, why should any ally think they would get any better help? Joe Biden has failed the American people overseas and therefore domestically as well. It has put them, every single American around the world is now more in danger than they have been in perhaps decades. Because consistently, Every terrorist organization, every rogue nation, every nation that has a gripe or a grudge with the United States knows that if they push, Joe Biden will fold. He will leave tanks. He will leave ammunition. He will leave money and perhaps even sensitive data. He will leave everything to run away because he doesn't want to have a headline saying that he is fighting a war. The poll goes on to say, in a situation like this, is it better to stay put and wait for the United States government to organize help, or is it better to try and leave the country via your own arrangement? Remember, this is some of the things that we've seen. Antony Blinken, the State Department, has told Americans in 2021 that the United States will get them home. Joe Biden went on national TV and said, we're going to get everyone home that wants to come home. And I don't know anyone who wants to live in a war zone. And they're still not home. Do you think it's better to wait for the Biden-Harris administration that doesn't seem to care, that is taking years and still not getting people home, even as terrorists are capturing these American citizens? 80% agree. Don't trust the Biden-Harris administration. Leave as soon as you can. Don't wait. Because if you wait, you're going to be there a long time and you will be putting your life in danger. Going on, the poll then asks, do you think the U.S. government should engage with the warring parties in the Sudan to ensure the safety of U.S. citizens in the country? This is kind of the question that Lester Holt asked Joe Biden about the Ukraine. What about the children in the Ukraine? Would you go and use U.S. troops to get them out? Which in February of 2022, Joe Biden could have done. He could have flown from Germany, Ramstein Air Force Base. It would have taken about 2.5 hours to fly a C-130 into the airports in Kiev to round up all the children and have them go onto that plane, telling the world that this was an evacuation of children and loading the plane and flying them out. He could have done that. He could have said that this is a peace mission to save Americans, to take them out of harm's way, to get them out of the war, to take them away from the conflict. There was no fighting at that time. He could have done that. It would have cost $5 billion, not even a rounding error in our $7 trillion budget, and he chose not to. And he's choosing not to do so in the Sudan. 37%, the majority of people who took the poll at the time that we did, agree. Yes, Joe Biden should go and get those American citizens and get them home, to take those 16,000 Americans and to get them out of the zone, and to use U.S. troops wherever and however necessary to get them home. If it was your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your uncle, your aunt, your children, if they were the ones that were in the Sudan or Ukraine or Afghanistan or whatever country comes next, you would want the United States government to save them because we have the resources and the capability to do so. And instead, Joe Biden's telling you they're not important. Do you support or oppose the United States sending in its armed forces to the Sudan to help evacuate citizens? See, now this is a trick question from the Yougov poll because it doesn't qualify that. We're not going into the Sudan. If you're saying, are we going to go into the Sudan to take that country over, to have another Iraq, to be fighting in a civil war like in Syria? No, of course not. But should we use armed troops to save American citizens who want to leave the war zone, who had no choice? They were cut off. The Biden administration didn't give them the option, didn't help them to leave? Well, yeah, I would use U.S. troops for that. That's the job of the government. But only 23% answered this question, but I think the number would be higher if they were careful with the wording. Now, they also ask, well, have you traveled overseas? Of course I have. I've traveled not to Europe. I lived in Moscow. I've talked about this many times on this program at speeches that I've had at colleges and other events. I've mentioned I lived in Moscow during the time of the attempted coup in 91. I've lived in Soviet Georgia, the capital city, Tbilisi. And I was there when they started their civil war. So I've been involved when I have seen active insurrections. I have seen attempted coups. I have watched tanks roll down the street towards me as rogue agents are trying to take over a government. I've been there. I've seen that. And yes, during the attempted coup in Moscow, yes, I was trying to get out of the country. And in 91, the United States Embassy was helping Americans plan a route out. I had a route out with the United States Embassy, with the Irish Embassy, with the German Embassy. We had multiple embassies that were working to help American citizens have an alternate way out of the country. And we were within a day of all of us exiting. And then I also had additional plans with the other fellow Marines at the time to be able to leave with them if I could not leave with diplomatic personnel. That's the difference between 1991 and today in 2023. So this goes into the next question that comes from the Yougov poll. Have you or anyone you have ever known needed assistance from the U.S. government while abroad? And as I said, yes, I did. The hardline communists were going to businesses and they were sending Russians into gulags because they were working with international businesses. So many international expatriates, we were all being told that we were going to be captured, charged as spies, and sent to gulags. It was a very serious time. And I know what the government was doing then as opposed to what we see the government do now. Was I satisfied with the way the embassy, the United States Marines, and other allied nations to the United States, and was I satisfied with the way they gave us multiple plans on how to exit, to be able to get out of that country? Yes, I was satisfied. If you were abroad and caught up in a war or violence that suddenly erupted, how much trust would you have in the U.S. government to help bring you to safety? That is today. Not in 1991, today. If you were overseas, you took a vacation, and you went to a foreign country, it doesn't matter which country it would be. It doesn't matter if it was France, or you went over to Tunisia, or you went over to Thailand. It doesn't matter what country. If you went to a foreign country, based on what you have seen in 2021, 2022, 2023, do you believe that Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration would try to help you get back home, to help ensure your safety, or would they abandon you as they did to 5,000 Americans in Afghanistan, to 10,000 Americans in the Ukraine, to 16,000 Americans in the Sudan? Which one do you think would happen to you? 56% of the people say they have no trust that Joe Biden would come to help them. Now, I did mention in this poll, I think it was strange that they did not tell anyone about what happened in Afghanistan, in Ukraine, and that this is a pattern, a system that has been repeating over and over again. But let me finish this very simply. American citizens, according to the Yougov poll we took earlier today, do not trust that Joe Biden would help them if they were endangered in a foreign country, which is the purpose and the primary mission of every government in the world, to protect its people. And Joe Biden has failed in that. And they acknowledge that. Even if they don't realize and recognize that this is a pattern that Joe Biden has been doing every year he has been in office. They have no trust. They have no faith. The majority of Americans do not trust Joe Biden if this poll is to be considered accurate. And I have to ask you, if the American people know that Joe Biden doesn't care, he doesn't have empathy, not really. He acts like he has empathy when he does a press conference, when he has an election ad, but he doesn't actually have empathy. Not when it counts. So what are our allies seeing? This isn't just an accident. This isn't just incompetency. This is a plan. This is purposive. Joe Biden doesn't care who he leaves behind or how their lives will be destroyed. He is worried about headlines and how that will affect the next election. And that means not one ally can trust Joe Biden and the American government under the Biden-Harris administration. That's why Japan is militarizing. The Philippines are militarizing. Why every nation in the world, including Iceland, are militarizing right now and gearing up for war. There is no confidence. There is no reason to have trust. I wanted to be explicit here, to focus just on this one issue, to make sure you understand that we can't have a government that runs like this. This is not a foreign policy that can stand. This has to change. Joe Biden has to grow some balls and stand up for the American people, because if he doesn't, then we will see this happen in nation after nation after nation. This will not end. But that's how we see this. That's how we see the situation. This is the data that we have been able to collect since 2021 and ongoing. How do you feel? Do you trust the Biden-Harris administration? Do you believe that they would come and save you if you were in a country that suddenly became a war zone? We look forward to hearing what you have to say, and we hope that we will see you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live stream where we talk about this and other issues every week. I know you've heard it before. What difference does it? You make the difference. When you watch, chat, tweets, your likes and shares, and your subscription, you make the difference. From across the world, you help us to keep the lights on and the stream alive. You are making the difference to fight the woke and the crazy legislation that we see before. We at No Soundbites Allowed, and I want to thank you for everything that you do in helping us reach our goal, and your likes, your tweets, your comments, and your subscriptions to the channel. We want to thank you from the bottom of our heart. And this is a special thank you to those who have donated to the channel and helped us in all of our efforts. We will strive to make this channel the best that we possibly can, because you deserve no less. Thank you.